I'm looking at and comparing the 100mm and 150mm lens. Both are made by Sirui. Both are part of the Venus series of anamorphic lenses with a 1.6 squeeze factor. They both come in at a maximum aperture of t2.9. Both of them are designed for full frame, mirrorless cameras. Both lenses provide incredible background separations when shooting wide open, even at t4. So I definitely chose one of these lenses over the other. They both have exceptional image quality. They both have great form and function. So let's talk about the Venus series. Now the 150, that is the longest in the series of Sirui lenses, and in particular in the Venus series lens. In the Saturn series, you have 35, 50, and 75. From what I've heard, they're not going any longer in the Saturn series, and it makes sense that if they're making that Saturn series so small and lightweight, that the 75 is obviously the longest focal length they can fit into that size lens. I already have the 35 and 75 in the Saturn series, but I wanted to get a longer range, and I wasn't sure which of these two would be the one that I would go with. I took it out for the month and did a couple of jobs with them to decide which one I would end up keeping. So let me delve into the similarities of these two first. Some of them I already mentioned, which is the type of mounts they come with. They're anamorphic, and they're at a t2.9 aperture. They're both long focal lengths. They're heavy. They're heavy-duty lenses. They weigh about 3.3 pounds. One of the similarities between these two is the aperture and focus ring locations. So if you line them up next to each other, if you're on a rig that has a focus wheel or another wheel that you would use to manually change the aperture on this lens, then replacing one with the other is going to match. I believe their entire Venus line and Saturn line is set up the same way. Unlike some of the other lenses in this series and in the Saturn series, there's very minor pincushion distortion on these. The wider of a field that you're shooting, the more likely you are to see it. So here's an example of my 35 versus the 100. And you can notice the difference. Now this is something that you can change in most NLEs. You are able to adjust some of that, but there's very little, if any, that you need to adjust with both of these. They're really sharp, wide open, and they're really sharp, stopped down all the way. Most of the Sirui anamorphic lenses offer that same type of sharpness to them. So if you're looking for something a little dirtier, or you want to add sort of a glow, mist, or haze, you can achieve that by adding a filter to your lens or doing some processing in post-production on this. Let's take a look at the characteristics that most people are looking for in an anamorphic lens. And that's going to be the lens flare and the bokeh. So here's the lens flare on the 100. This is on the 150. Here's an example where you'll get to see both the lens flare and the bokeh. Now, of course, my daughter was very close to the lens, so you do get a washed out image. Your lens flare is going to depend on the type of light and the distance from your lens to the light. So here's an example where I'm far away, you get that nice thin streak. When you're up close, it's going to wash the image out. And sometimes it just comes in, like in this particular interview shot, it came in from the back window. Because of the focal length on these lenses, it's really easy to get rid of that just by adding a lens hood to it or a matte box. The bokeh, it's pretty intense, it's pretty cool if that's the look that you're going for. Here's an example of what it looks like on the 100, and here's what it looks like on the 150. The 100mm is the equivalent of a 63. The 150mm is the equivalent of a 93. In this particular shot, I left my tripod set up in the same position, and all I did was switch off the lenses. So I have a 35, a 75, a 100, and the 150. Now this was during the daytime, so I stopped down all the way to f16 just to give you the full range of focus. But the idea is to show you what you're getting in your field of view with these lenses. And that's important when deciding which one of these lenses to choose. So here's where the first difference comes in, and that's going to be the minimal focusing distance on these two lenses. On all of the anamorphic lenses from Sirui, the minimal focusing distance is 3 feet, which means you have to be at least 3 feet away from your subject to get them in focus. Yes, there's a workaround with using different crop factors and diopters, but this is within the lens itself. The exception is the 150. The 150 has a much shorter range, which is 1.9 feet or 58 centimeters. When you couple that with the fact that it's a long lens, you can get really cool macro style shots with this. And because of that long range, because it's cutting out the distance in front of me, I'm able to get these shots with them. If I wanted to get the background in focus on the 150, yeah, it takes a lot of spinning, but look how nice that focus throw can go from my foreground to my background on this. Here's how close I'm able to get with the 100. Now this is a nice shot, and because it's opening up a little bit more field of view, I do like the way that this shot looks. I like the composition of it, but it's not a macro shot. We talked about using a diopter on these. You certainly could do that on the 100 to get a macro shot, and it would give you the same effect. But there's something to consider about the diopter. It's going to allow your camera to get closer to your subject or object, but it's going to blur the background. I really love how both lenses give an amazing separation between subject and background. I got these lenses because I needed something to do for interviews. I go on the road once a month for a few days and I shoot a series of interviews. I'm walking into people's businesses, people's houses. Oftentimes I don't know how much space I have. Sometimes I have to use the Pocket 3 with a panel light. In these instances, I really like the 100. What I really like about both of these lenses for interviews is, since it's lacking that pincushion corner distortion, I can frame my subject left or right of frame. I don't have to keep them centered. Here's an example of an interview that I did on the 75. I had my subject center frame. This was a look that I was going for, so I was okay with that. But I've often shied away from using the 75 as an interview lens for that reason, because of the pincushion distortion. Both of these lenses are very heavy. As I mentioned, they're 3 pounds, and it comes with a thread to mount onto your tripod. Some of you might have this, but it's a particular issue. I'm shooting on the Blackmagic cinema camera, that's the full frame camera, and I use the battery grip. With the added height of the battery pack, that can be a little bit of a challenge to get something to support the lens. If you're not shooting on the Blackmagic camera, and you have a smaller, lighter framed camera like a Sony or Lumix, Canon, what I would suggest is to mount the lens onto the tripod and let the camera sit on it. I was also surprised at how well these two lenses worked handheld. I typically don't put anything over a 50, or even a 50, I don't typically do handheld. I'm going 35, 28, 24 or lower when I'm going handheld. I think the reason this works is because of the weight of the lens and because of the weight of the camera that I'm using. It was actually very comfortable to do handheld footage with. The one thing to be aware of is that the aperture ring is not too far away. And even though I know I'm not trying to change the aperture ring, sometimes just by holding it down there, it moves. So it's not a hard stop aperture ring. It's easy to just move it along. That was something I noticed when I was out shooting with both of these lenses. It is something to be aware of. Another issue that I've seen come up is chromatic aberration. Now, I haven't experienced it in any of the things that I was filming. Most of the interviews that I'm filming, I'm shooting at 5.6. But from the reviews that I've seen, most of the chromatic aberration will show up at 2.9. Once you move into T4 and start closing it down more, it goes away. I had so much fun shooting on both of these lenses that it was really hard to decide on which one. I love a sharp lens. I know people are chasing the filmic look and they want things to look dirty and grainy. And I feel like if you want that, then it's better to start with a clean image and then add that later. I certainly have enough older lenses that will give me that look. For interviews, these lenses are great. The one thing to consider when you're choosing either one of these lenses is how much space you have and what you're filming. Remember, it's more like you're picking a 63mm versus a 94mm lens. Either one of them is a great option. The 150 might be the advantage if you want to get some of those macro shots without having to add a diopter to it. The lens that I ended up keeping is the 100, and it was a tough call because they're both great. They both certainly, you can't go wrong with either one. It just made sense to get the 100 because of the reason why I bought it, which is to do interviews and to have a longer focal length anamorphic lens that I could use in conjunction with the 35 and 75. I think a great combination is the 35 and the 100. It's important to understand how an anamorphic lens behaves. An anamorphic lens is going to squeeze your image vertically so that in post it's de-squeezed. And what happens is you get a wider field of view than you do for most lenses typical of that focal length. Which one is your favorite? Are you shooting on any of these? Are you thinking of getting any of these? Drop me a comment, I'd love to hear. There's more videos that I have on the other lenses made by Sirui, so check them out. Take care of yourself, take care of each other.